Okay, it's actually not lagging now. Hello everyone. I really wish that I didn't have to, come back to YouTube on such a low note. I do plan on making more videos again. I know you've probably heard this for the 100th time if you've been watching this channel lately, and some of you may not even remember who I am, even if you're subscribed. Anyways, normally I do like reviews and whatnot. But as you can probably tell, I have not really been able to keep up with long form content. That's because my life has been an absolute roller coaster over the past few years, and every time I've tried to get back into recording content, uploading content, I'll generally get the content recorded and then something will come up, kill my mood, or take away from my time, and then by the time I remember it, I'm either not interested in the project anymore, or I just don't have time for the project anymore. Now, the reason I'm recording today, as much as I like to avoid drama, I unfortunately have come here to vent. So if you don't like trauma dumping videos and whatnot, best click off now. But otherwise, it's going to be a bit of a ride. So, essentially, the reason I'm making this video is, unfortunately, I myself have finally come across a D&D horror story of my own. My own is happening in real life right now, and it is basically killed one of the very last things I can really do to enjoy myself, has basically led me to isolation. That's the best way to put it, because if you'll remember the video I posted over a year or two ago, my best friend basically ended up causing me to be disconnected from my entire friend group because their partner at the time basically got the wrong message because they looked through my best friend's phone, basically got the wrong message from me trying to warn him that he was in a bad relationship, convinced him that I was trying to separate them so I could be with him, and the rest is history. They basically made false allegations about me doing bad things to him and posted it for my friend group to see. Basically, indirectly got separated from the friend group because I didn't want to deal with the drama, so I just left. Tried to come back, but the few people who don't know anything about that situation barely even remember who the heck I am. Especially since I go by a different username than I used to. Used to go by Tommy LT or Tamiya. Now I go by Taylor. And basically, that whole situation disconnected me from that friend group. So D&D was basically my main way to hang out with people in real life, to be able to express myself off of the internet and get a break from technology. However, unfortunately, that has changed. So, I play Dungeons and Dragons. I am a DM slash player. I really like to do story writing and world building. However, unfortunately, my D&D campaign came to an early end, and my experience as a player has likely come to an end for the other campaign that was going on at the time. So, to take us a step back, this whole situation started before I ever made it to the game store, before I ever heard of the game store. Not going to refer to any of the players or the game store or the owner by name. Going to use code names for players, and I'm not going to reference the store at all. Most I'll say is it's a small mom and pop store where you basically really get to know each other, really get to know the players you're playing with, the DMs who are running your games, and even the owner himself. However, unfortunately, going back, a problem player ended up joining the D&D groups. However, it's a lot harder to deal with problem players in this sort of setting. This is a local game store, an LGS, as some of you might know if you've played like Magic the Gathering and whatnot. This means that people are paying to be in a real event, and people are basically paying to be there. Every player is a paying customer, and kicking out a player who is a major paying customer can basically end up making a difference between whether or not you get to pay bills for the month or not. And this is one of those cases where the problem player is a major customer for the store. He makes a lot of purchases there. He's the main buyer of snacks there that I've seen, main buyer of food and drink, main buyer of D&D supplies. I also think he plays another game there, but I'm not sure on that. Again, I'm not referring to anyone's identity here, so I suppose it doesn't matter too much if I'm wrong, because either which way, they are a major person who makes purchases at the store. Now, it all started before I ever started playing at the store. The party was playing a Descent into Avernus campaign. I don't remember exactly what was going on because I was not there. However, things started becoming a problem when he basically started doing things without consenting the party, and he would also have a tendency to escalate moral dilemmas and whatnot to PvP situations instead of actually resolving them out of character. He would try to force other players around, like, you know how if you're talking to, let's say, a merchant and you want to barter with them, you can make a persuasion check contested with a check of theirs or a save of theirs. Depends on who's DMing. Sometimes they'll just not roll and have a flat DC. In his case, he was trying to make persuasion checks, deception checks against players very regularly to try and control them. Because out of character, they knew something was up. Their character would have a reason to believe something was up, or he would try to convince them that, hey, you're wrong, maybe you should support my morality, because he had a tendency to play a lot of lawful good characters which fall into the spectrum of what some of you may know as stupid good characters, which are characters who are so bound to the concept of being high and mighty that they are willing to throw their own safety and well-being out the window, or just straight up leave a party if they aren't getting their way with their moral high ground. Honestly, this player probably should have been kicked from the group by now, but unfortunately they haven't. That's just one of those cases where we don't feel comfortable kicking the player out of the group as much as we're uncomfortable with having the player in the group, because they are a paying customer who is coming a significant distance away to be in the group. And when they aren't being problematic, they're a pretty fun player to be around, actually. Like, they really help to mix things up. They have a unique take to role playing, and last but not least, I can't say for sure myself. I don't want to jump the gun on this, but we're very sure that, like myself, I am in the autism spectrum. We believe that they may be in the autism spectrum, and we don't want to leave them out because, as someone who has a spectrum disorder myself, it is very hard for folks like me to be able to find a group they can play in and not get left in the dust. Like, I can really get into things, but I have a hard time really getting into things. Like, sometimes I just feel off and I'll spend basically the entire session just listening, occasionally piping in when it's needed, and basically doing little to contribute to the session outside of magic and the occasional decision making or occasional check or save. So it's one of those cases where we don't want them to feel left out. We don't want them to end up in a situation where they don't have a group they can play with. We don't want to kick them out of the store because they're part of what keeps the store alive. And without them, the store is one step closer to going under if something major were to happen, like a major business expense comes up, or let's say, God forbid, something happens to the building and they have to relocate. They're basically one step closer to that just ending the business right away. May not seem like much, but if one person is even just contributing $25 to the store in a given month, that is $25 that could be spent towards one product, towards one improvement to the store, which will add up over time. So, from a business standpoint, it would also be bad to kick the player out. Because I couldn't be certain, but they basically spend about, I'd say, $60 in the store in any given month. $50, $60. So they're a paying customer. They are a decent role player. However, they tend to let their I would say they tend to let their personal feelings and thoughts leach into the fantasy world that the D&D sessions take place in. So, we go on for a bit. Seems like this player is not having any sort of real negative impact on the game. Yeah, sure, they're making dumb decisions. The DM occasionally has to have a heart-to-heart with them. But in the end, they aren't really having too much of a negative impact of the game. Like, sure, sometimes we'll have to take a brief tangent because the party ends up split. But we managed to get that situation under control. The DM managed to handle it in a very professional manner. Only once did he ever really break character as a DM to diffuse the situation, but otherwise things were working out. And I say were there. Eventually there ended up being another PvP situation And eventually the store owner, who was also a player, ended up having to basically say, hey, you keep fighting my character, and you're basically not allowing me to play the characters I want to play, even though I'm not really interfering with the actual play experience. Like, the DM tended to play more evil-leaning characters, and not the DM. The store owner really liked to play evil-leaning characters, which was a really nice change of pace because that meant that we had some sort of counterbalance in the party where most players tend to lean in neutral or good paths, or generally among the spectrum between chaotic good and lawful good to lawful evil. But he managed to bring in a little spice to the situation. He managed to change things up. The player didn't like it. He would tend to metagame to try and catch his characters in the act of doing bad things. Speaking on that, the player originally didn't have too much of a problem with it, but increasingly over time, he would tend to metagame to figure out monster stat blocks, what happens next in the story, and whatnot. He would literally, in fact, actually, now that I remember, this has been a problem the whole time. He bought a copy of Descent into Avernus while party was playing a campaign of Descent into Avernus. I would have the book on him, and the DM had to threaten to kick him out of the game in order for him to stop bringing the book, stop reading the book, stop looking at monster stat blocks and metagaming, and to put a lot more work on the DM to basically change up these stat blocks. Eventually it got to where a lot of times DMs were homebrewing, and when they didn't, they had to change up monster stat blocks. Like for me, I ran Icewind Dale, and I knew he had a problem with metagaming, and I myself like to spice things up, so it wasn't as much of a problem for me, because I kind of ended up wanting to change things up anyways, but I had to go the extra mile to make sure that players couldn't metagame, just because of this player. Basically, the entire fight against Arl at the end, I removed all of her weaknesses. I ended up changing up how some of her attacks worked, rose some DCs, gave her extra legendary resistance. All that to basically ensure that metagaming couldn't happen. And it kind of ruined things a little for other players because with what I had to compensate with, originally the party could have done a pretty good job against her. Like, they steamrolled her the first time when I used her regular stats, slightly modified. However, because the player in question had bought a copy of Icewind Dale in the interim and had read through Icewind Dale, I basically had to change a lot of things to make the experience more unique. The experience was heavily carried by NPCs that I myself introduced into the game, as well as by characters that originally weren't that significant, playing a significant role in the campaign. I basically did what could pretty much be described as a half homebrew, where I took the world, I took the campaign, and did my own thing with it. And as much as creative liberty may have been an original inspiration, the want to be different became a need to be distinct. And problems have only recently begun to escalate more and more. Pretty much there is a female player in the group, the only female player in the group. She really likes to play in the store because she's already there from her work. She really likes to hang out there and play D&D, but she herself is an emotionally sensitive person. I know from experience that that can make playing D&D pretty hard. Sometimes you may accidentally make emotionally charged decisions. Sometimes your character may end up inspired off of emotions you've been feeling, problems you've been having, and then you may want to stop playing them because they're no longer relevant. And sometimes you're really relying on D&D to be your escape, so when real problems start to press into the campaign, be it just themes of the campaign or problems with players in the campaign, that can really kill the mood for everyone because it ends up bringing you down and ruining the experience for you. I myself have really had to bite my tongue sometimes, but with her, this has been a major problem because she suspects discrimination. There's a chance that, yes, there has been discrimination. Because there has been discrimination in the past. I mean, there's a chance there is discrimination still now related to how she's being treated by this problem player. Because he has done some inappropriate behaviors before. We told him it's not cool. He seemed to chill for a bit. But anymore, as much as sometimes it seems like the party is being a bit pushy sometimes, we try our best to avoid that. But unfortunately, it's come up a lot with her, and mainly between her and the problem player. Because the problem player has a tendency to be this pushy player and to really try to force their way sometimes. Like if a player doesn't want to do this, as I said earlier, they'll try to say, make a check against the player, like a persuasion check, a deception check, an intimidation check, to try and make their character think or do different. This was a real problem with the female player because already it felt like a lot of the times they really just didn't fit in. They were trying their best to fit in, and this made them feel like they were really just being forced around, didn't really have their own character, weren't really participating in the session. So they end up having to take a couple breaks, and this player ended up having to be gotten on sternly a couple of times. Now, fast forward to today, and now, today, the party might be disbanding. Essentially, I've been going through some problems myself. I ended up being badly sick a few weeks in a row. Like, first I had a stomach bug, then I ended up being exposed to, well, I don't know the exact order, but I had a stomach bug, I was exposed to COVID, I potentially had COVID. So, I ended up missing so many sessions that the game store owner stepped down and was like, look, you haven't been able to keep up with your campaign. We're going to have to shut it down and go back to one DM running every week. So that was a bit of a low blow during a time where I was having a rough time, but unfortunately it had to be done for the good of the players because a lot of time, basically every time these illnesses came up, it was at the last second. Like the night before, I would have such a severe headache from pinched nerves in my discs that I end up throwing up. Ended up having COVID symptoms the day before the campaign was ready to run. Ended up with really bad diarrhea the day I had to run. It was all just not really very good. And I wasn't really able to control any of that, so kind of felt like I was getting punished for circumstances beyond my control. But in the end, I was starting to get over it because I kind of understood, hey, the players need to play the game, DM needs time to plan, so if it's your turn to run and you can't show up when the day comes and you're letting people know like the morning of, the night before, that you're not able to come because X circumstance came up, and now the other DM suddenly has to put something together, then it's a real letdown for players because that can lead to sessions that just don't run because there's no players or there's no DM, there's no material ready. I was able to understand that. However, back to the problem player, I may just be out of D&D entirely. Because not only am I to the point where I'm taking a brief break from D&D because it left sour taste in my mouth, basically not being able to DM anymore after buying materials to DM with, after putting in the hours for weeks to plan a homebrew campaign that was a year in the making. It really stung, but at least I was able to get over that. But back to the problem player. After yesterday, something apparently happened when I was away. And today I got a message in the LGS Discord that, hey, something's up, something's wrong. I look and I see that. Oh, hold on, I think I see something here. Is that a sore? Sorry about this. Guess just the lighting. Sorry about that. I don't mean to have that sort of behavior. Let's get sanitized and get back to what I was saying. So basically, the problem player had apparently gotten to where... No, that's the wrong tangent. I'm very sorry, everyone. This podcast was going relatively well. But back to what I was saying. Basically, the problem player had been controlling things. The party had been doing things without advising this player first. She had to take breaks from the game, breaks from the campaigns, as she felt like she was being controlled, like her character was being controlled. And eventually she was like, look, I'll come back to the campaign. I'll stay for good this time. However, if something like this happens again, I'm going to stop coming to the campaign. I'm going to only start coming on the days when it's not you guys playing. And apparently something came up last session, yesterday, because she came in the chat basically saying she was done with having her character controlled, done with being discriminated against, and she was going to be leaving. Now, knowing the context leading up to this situation, I knew that it was for real this time. She's been having it rough, basically, as the only female player in our group. There's a female player in another group, but things are a bit different over there. There isn't anything of this sort happening in that group, and she's well respected. But this player is not getting the respect they deserve, and we're dealing with a newer DM that doesn't really know how to diffuse these kinds of situations. I myself am very uncomfortable having to diffuse these situations, but in the end, she basically said she's not going to be coming anymore. And what that means is we may end up losing a second player as well, because her husband comes down to play D&D as well. And of course, this situation is going to affect him. He hasn't said a thing about it, but within all due reason, this is likely going to affect his ability to come, not because of transportation, but just because, look, you're discriminating against my wife. You're doing bad things to my wife. How am I supposed to show up to this group who isn't going to show respect to my wife? I myself have never had a wife. I'm mostly gay. I'll just go ahead and say that right there. I'm mostly gay. I have a boyfriend. I'm in a long distance relationship. So things are a bit more indirect when you're dealing with this situation where it's a husband and his wife. He's probably not going to take that very well. Like, even though my boyfriend is all the way in several states away, I would be livid if someone did something disrespectful to him. So to see this happening right in front of him, he's likely not going to be showing up anymore. At least not for a while the situation simmers down. Problem here is, not only does that mean they're down 2 players, which means if anyone doesn't show up, the session can't be run. They're also dealing with the fact that there's still that problem player in the group. He's still going to be showing up, so chances are, now that one problem has already exploded and gone over the edge, another problem will likely end up arising, and I myself don't want to deal with that, which means that basically puts me out of being able to play, at least comfortably. That puts me having to wonder if maybe there won't be a session because someone ends up showing up. We're basically a heavy risk of not having a session on any given day it's time to have a session. And all in all, it's basically destroyed the group. I basically am better off not going to the store for D&D anymore and starting an online game with my friends if I decide I want to do D&D. However, I may not end up doing D&D in a while because this whole ordeal between me not being able to DM and them making it uncomfortable to play, it's all just left a sour taste in my mouth. So I'll likely be retiring from D&D for a while until I have a campaign I want to run that's fully fleshed out one where I won't have to worry about being sick because maybe I can run from home, maybe I can play from home. Because when you're playing remotely, especially by text, it's a lot better and you don't have to worry about being sick. Yes, sometimes you'll have to use theater of the mind, but theater of the mind is a lot better than not being able to play at all. So, I know it's not any super major horror story with a massive twist, but this whole situation has been a bit taxing on me, especially since I have very few ways to spend my time. I'm on a shared internet connection, so online gaming can only be done during certain points in the day. That internet connection is metered, so if we use so much of it, we end up getting throttled. So if I play too much, then no one can play online. And I also have to deal with the fact that I have arthritis, so as much as I can play the games I like to play, like fighting games, like Celeste. I know Celeste's not a fighting game, but it may as well be a fight. It ends up being a game I have to take breaks from because my wrist is hurting, my mind is exhausted from trying to find a solution and execute it perfectly. Everything I want to do for fun basically requires me to be in a somewhat decent mood anyways, because I don't get too much joy from producing vent content. Like, yeah, right now I feel a lot more relaxed now that I got that off my chest, but it's not content I enjoy creating, and later I'll look back on this video, back on this podcast, and likely be a bit upset that I ever had to make it in the first place. I have a hard time letting go of things sometimes. And all in all, it's just something that really shouldn't happen, but unfortunately, just one of those cases where when a set of circumstances lines up, you can't really expect that to happen, and when it does happen, there's not always much you can do. Like, yeah, we could kick the player out of the group, but at this point, then what? It's already too late. If we kick him out of the group when there's times where I'm sick because I don't have the best immune system, it basically dies the moment a hint of coolness comes, then the session's a no-go. And we can't really merge the groups because, yes, there's another group running on the days we run, but it's full. It is packed over there. Technically, there wasn't room for players to join, and they ended up getting more players to where now the table's overflowing. People are having to write on their character sheets like on their lap, pretty much. And yeah, it is very packed over there, very complex right now. And they're already in the meat of the story to where it's going to be hard to introduce some new characters. But in the end, there's not much we can do with that because in the end, we can't really send anyone over there. And if we kick out the problem character, then we don't have a session. So, that's been my D&D horror story. Thank you to anyone who was willing to listen. I know I don't really have what anyone could consider a following, but I digress. This has been Taylor. Thanks for coming by. I'll see you next time. Peace.